The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 59th floor of Smith Technologies. Below, Manhattan buzzed with life, but inside the sleek silver office, the only sound was the faint tapping of Janet Anderson's keyboard. She was already at her desk when Nelson Smith arrived, as she always was. Sharp, punctual, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit and cobalt blouse, her fingers danced over her tablet while a mug of his favorite black coffee waited beside her laptop. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," she greeted, not looking up. Nelson paused for half a second. He always did. There was something about the way she said his name, firm, confident, yet calm, that made the world briefly slow down. "Morning, Janet," he replied. His voice was deep, quiet, unreadable. He never smiled, not really. But if Janet noticed the slight softening in his tone when he spoke to her, she never let it show. She followed him into his office, reading his schedule aloud. "You have a board call at 10, your digital partnership lunch at 1, and Ava Sinclair moved her meeting to 4. Also, your mother's charity gala RSVP is due today." He winced. "Decline. And no Ava in-person meetings. I told her we're not partnering." "You told her we were considering it," Janet corrected gently. "Then you stopped replying." Nelson sank into his leather chair. "Remind me why I pay you again?" "To remind you what you said, keep you from accidentally insulting people with old money, and to tell you when your tie is crooked." He looked down. It wasn't. She raised an eyebrow. With a small sigh, Nelson pulled the tie slightly straighter. Janet allowed herself the smallest flicker of a smile. For 6 years she had stood by him, through acquisitions, lawsuits, mergers, market crashes, and personal heartbreaks. When his father died, she was the one who flew with him to California to handle the will. When his ex-fiancée tried to leak company secrets, Janet was the one who shut it down, quietly, ruthlessly, and without fanfare. And through it all, she loved him. Not the way people adored celebrities or envied billionaires. No, Janet loved Nelson in a quiet, bone-deep way. She loved the man who always carried a photo of his late dog in his wallet, who tipped janitors in cash because he'd once been one, who said thank you even on his worst days. But he would never know. Janet had learned early on, women like her, black, ambitious but behind the desk, weren't the kind men like Nelson chose. They admired her efficiency, respected her intelligence, but love? No. That was for someone softer, lighter, someone like... "Miss Anderson?" came a voice from the doorway. Janet turned to see Ava Sinclair sauntering in, blonde, poised, and dressed like she was headed to a fashion editorial instead of a corporate meeting. She smiled with a kind of precision that never reached her eyes. "Ava," Janet greeted coolly. "Just confirming my 4 o'clock with Nelson." "It's still on?" Janet glanced at the calendar. "He'll be in a video call then." "Oh," Ava drawled. "Well, you know how flexible I am. Just thought I'd say hi. Is he seeing anyone?" Janet blinked. "I wouldn't know." Ava laughed. "You're with him all the time, Janet. I figured if anyone knew the intimate details of Mr. Smith's personal life." Janet's expression didn't flinch, but her chest felt tight. "You'll have to ask him yourself." Later that evening, Janet sat alone in her apartment. The city glowed outside her window, but the light inside was dim. She stared at her reflection. No makeup, hair in a wrap, wearing her worn hoodie from college. She scrolled through her email and found the one she'd been avoiding all week. "Congratulations. Your offer from Equinox Startups is ready for review. A leadership position, stock options, California sun, creative freedom, a team of her own." But leaving Nelson? She closed her laptop, suddenly suffocated. Her phone buzzed. A text from her old college friend, Caleb. "Still coming to the reunion tomorrow? I hear the CEO of Smith Tech might be there." Janet smiled sadly. Caleb had always been charming, kind, too good for their campus. They'd almost dated once, but timing hadn't been right. She didn't reply. The next day, Janet walked into the rooftop reunion in Harlem wearing a deep plum jumpsuit that made her skin glow. Laughter and music swirled around her as she sipped sparkling cider and nodded at familiar faces. "Janet Anderson?" a voice called. She turned, and her breath caught. Caleb Hart, taller than she remembered, still boyishly handsome but with a maturity that softened his sharp features. He wore navy slacks and a white shirt, no tie, 2 buttons undone, and that same warm smile she remembered. "Wow," he said, stepping closer. "You look powerful." She laughed. "I'll take that over pretty." "You're both." They talked for hours, about careers, regrets, ambitions, and why love was never quite simple. He touched her arm when he laughed. He complimented her ideas. He asked if she was seeing anyone. "No," she said. "Not really." Caleb's gaze lingered. "Maybe I'll change that." The next morning, Janet sat at her desk as always. Nelson walked in late, eyes on his phone, as she handed him coffee and a memo. Then he paused, seeing the small Polaroid on her desk, her and Caleb from the reunion, both laughing. "Old friend?" he asked, voice clipped. "Yes," Janet replied lightly. "We reconnected. He's nice." A beat of silence passed. Nelson turned, walked into his office, and shut the door harder than necessary. Janet stared at the door for a moment, and for the first time in 6 years she allowed herself to wonder. What if he'll never say it? What if this is all there will ever be? She turned back to her screen and clicked, "Accept offer on the job in California." Her hands trembled. The letter of resignation sat on Nelson's desk like a silent bomb. Janet stood across from him, hands clasped in front of her, posture perfectly straight. Her voice was steady, calm even, but Nelson couldn't hear anything past the thundering in his chest. "I've accepted a position in San Francisco," she said. "COO at Equinox Startups. I'll be moving in 2 weeks." The words shouldn't have hurt. He was her boss, nothing more. But something twisted in his stomach, a tight coil of disbelief and something dangerously close to panic. He lifted his gaze slowly, searching her face for a trace of emotion. There was none, just quiet resolve in her deep brown eyes. "I see," he said finally. "Congratulations." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you." He should have stood up, should have protested, should have said anything except what he did next. "I'll have HR begin the transition paperwork." The moment she nodded and turned away, a part of him shattered. For days, the rhythm of the office unraveled. Nelson was late to meetings. He snapped at the team. His assistant, temporary, forgettable, missed crucial notes. Emails went unanswered, documents misplaced. But what haunted him most was the empty desk outside his office. The scent of Janet's cinnamon tea had faded. Her quiet humming as she typed was gone. Even her handwriting, always so neat on his folders, had disappeared. And it wasn't just work. He missed the way she calmed him during boardroom tension, how she always knew when he needed a break before he asked, how she reminded him of his humanity when he'd locked himself into logic and numbers. He missed her. 3 nights before Janet's departure, Nelson sat alone in his penthouse, the city stretching endlessly below. A glass of scotch sat untouched beside him. His mind was elsewhere, 6 years of memories clawing their way to the surface. He remembered the first time he noticed her laugh. It was at a staff retreat in the Catskills. She had laughed at something one of the junior managers said. Loud, free, beautiful. He had watched her from a distance and wondered what it would feel like to be the reason she laughed like that. He remembered Tokyo, 2 years ago. A tech summit disaster had left them stranded during a typhoon. Their hotel lost power, and she'd sat with him in the dark hallway sharing stories about her childhood, wrapped in hotel blankets, while he listened in rare silence. She had fallen asleep beside him, her head on his shoulder. He hadn't moved for hours. He'd come close to telling her then, but he hadn't. Friday morning, Janet handed over her last stack of transition files. This has the updated vendor list, your quarterly travel summary, and Ava Sinclair's rescheduled pitch deck, she said. At the mention of Ava, Nelson stiffened. He hadn't seen her in over a week. She's still asking for a dinner meeting, Janet added without emotion. I'm not interested, he muttered, flipping through the papers. She seems to think you are. Janet. She looked up, startled by the edge in his voice. But what she saw behind his expression wasn't irritation. It was sadness. Something inside her flickered, but she quickly buried it. Will that be all, Mr. Smith? There it was again, Mr. Smith. She hadn't called him that in years. No, he said quietly, that won't be all. She waited, heart racing. Say it, please, just say it. But he didn't. Instead, he stood, nodded stiffly, and walked past her. That evening, Janet's friends threw her a farewell dinner at a rooftop lounge in Chelsea. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and Caleb sat close beside her, his hand resting on hers. You deserve this, he said softly. They're lucky to have you. Janet smiled, but her eyes kept drifting to her phone. No message, no call, no Nelson. By 11 p.m., it was clear he wasn't coming. Nelson stood in his office, staring at the framed photo Janet had left behind. It was of the two of them in Tokyo, standing beside a shrine. She was smiling, his arm loosely around her shoulder, his only candid photo in years. He hadn't even realized it meant something to her. And now she was leaving. He picked up the frame and gripped it so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had built empires, outsmarted governments, dominated markets, but he had failed at the one thing that mattered most. The next morning, Nelson's oldest friend, Marcus, stopped by unannounced. She's leaving tomorrow, right? Marcus asked, stepping into the penthouse kitchen. Nelson didn't answer. Jesus, man, you look like hell. You haven't slept, have you? Nelson ran a hand through his hair. She's not just my assistant, Marcus, she's the reason my life functions. I thought if I let her go, I'd prove I wasn't selfish, that she deserved more. Marcus blinked. You let her go because you love her? Nelson looked up, startled by the bluntness. Yeah, he admitted. I've loved her for years. Marcus stared at him like he'd grown two heads. So, go tell her, before that plane takes off. I can't. Why the hell not? She's happy now. She has options. She has Caleb. Marcus folded his arms. Or maybe she just got tired of waiting for the man she really wanted to wake up. Sunday morning. Janet zipped the last suitcase and took one last look around her apartment. The movers had come early. Caleb would meet her at the airport. Everything was done, but her heart was pounding. The city she loved had become a ghost town of memories. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Don't leave. Not yet. Please. N. Her breath caught. She stared at the message, hands trembling. Before she could respond, another buzz. Nelson Smith is calling. She answered. Hello? His voice was ragged. Janet, I need to see you. She didn't speak. I'm outside. Janet stood frozen in the middle of her now bare apartment, phone still pressed to her ear. I'm outside, Nelson had said. She rushed to the window, pushed aside the curtain, and saw him, standing by the curb in a crisp black coat, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his hair a little messier than usual. There was no car, no assistant, just him, and he looked wrecked. Her suitcase sat by the door. Caleb was on his way, and her flight left in 3 hours. This was the moment. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her coat and raced down the stairs, too impatient to wait for the elevator. When she stepped outside, Nelson looked up, and for the first time in all their years together, his composure cracked. He looked at her like a man who had been drowning and had just found air. I wasn't sure you'd come down, he said quietly. I almost didn't, she replied. A beat of silence passed. Then Janet folded her arms. Why are you here, Nelson? He stepped closer, hesitated, then looked her straight in the eyes. Because I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you walk out of that office without stopping you. 6 years, she said, voice trembling. 6 years, Nelson. I stood by you. I gave you everything, and I would have stayed forever if you'd given me one reason. I know, he whispered, and I didn't. I failed you because I was afraid. Of what? She asked. Of me? No. He shook his head. Of losing control. Of needing someone so much that I couldn't function without them. Of loving you and not being enough. Janet's breath caught. You love me? He took another step, voice raw. I love you, Janet. I've loved you since that night in Tokyo. Since you held my hand at my father's funeral. Since the moment you walked into my office and made my life make sense. Tears welled in her eyes. He reached for her hand. She let him. I thought I was being noble by letting you go, he continued. But it wasn't noble. It was cowardice. You don't belong behind a desk. You belong building empires of your own. But I want to build them with you. Not as your boss, as your partner. Janet looked down at their hands. His fingers were trembling. I accepted that job, Nelson. I'm moving to a different city. Caleb is waiting for me at the airport. Nelson flinched slightly at the mention of Caleb, but he nodded. I know. And if you get on that plane, I won't stop you. I'll never hold you back. You deserve happiness, with or without me. He paused. But I had to tell you the truth. I couldn't let you go without saying it. Janet stared at him. This was the man who never showed emotion, who built his life on logic and silence. And here he was, on a cold sidewalk, confessing everything. I waited so long for this, she whispered. I started to believe I imagined it all. You didn't. He reached up and gently cupped her face. You never did. She let out a soft breath. Then what do we do now? He smiled, just barely. That depends on whether you still want me. Her eyes searched his, unsure if this was real. Then finally, something inside her let go. She leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, slow, hesitant at first, then deeper, full of everything they'd never said. His hands slid to her waist as hers tangled in his coat. The city disappeared. When they pulled back, her forehead rested against his. I'm still going to California, she said. Nelson nodded slowly, his jaw tensing, but he didn't pull away. I figured. But, she added, I don't think it has to be goodbye. He opened his eyes, hope flickering. You could invest in Equinox, she teased, voice low. Or open a West Coast branch. Smith Tech could use a change of scenery. I'll open an entire tower if it means being close to you, he said, half joking, half serious. She laughed through her tears. Caleb arrived 10 minutes later. Janet met him at the edge of the block, explained everything honestly, gently. He smiled sadly, but nodded. You deserve that kind of love, he said. I hope he never forgets what it took to earn it. She hugged him. Thank you. And just like that, one chapter ended. 6 months later, the Smith Tech West Coast branch opened with a quiet ribbon-cutting ceremony. Janet stood at the podium, not behind Nelson but beside him, introduced as the new chief operating officer and co-lead on future ventures. She wore a white jumpsuit and gold heels, and her hand never left his. Nelson gave a short, nervous speech that ended with, I used to think falling in love would make me lose focus. But loving Janet is the smartest thing I've ever done. The press lost their minds. Later that night, as the sun dipped over the Pacific, they stood on the balcony of their new shared apartment, sipping champagne. Do you ever miss the old office? She asked playfully. Only the woman who used to work outside it, he replied, brushing his lips against her temple. She grinned. I think she's doing pretty well now. And as the stars blinked above them, they both knew. They had almost lost each other. But fate, and finally courage, had stepped in just in time. The garden at Villa La Massa in Florence, Italy, bloomed in full splendor. White roses, soft blush peonies, and lavender vines curled around wrought iron trellises as the golden sun dipped into the horizon. A gentle breeze swirled through the air, carrying the scent of jasmine and the soft chords of a string quartet. Janet stood at the end of the aisle, a vision in off-shoulder ivory silk, her natural curls swept into a halo crowned with pearls. Her eyes shimmered as she looked toward the altar, where Nelson waited. He had never looked more undone by love. Dressed in a tailored black tux, his eyes never left hers as she walked toward him, her hand resting lightly on her father's arm. Time seemed to fold in on itself. 6 years of silence, heartbreak, longing, now culminating in this one perfect moment. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant declared. Nelson didn't wait. He pulled Janet into his arms, and as their lips met, the small gathering of friends and family erupted into cheers and applause. They had crossed every line: power, race, silence, fear, but here they stood, unshakable. Their honeymoon, the Amalfi escape. They left the next morning for the Amalfi coast. No press, no paparazzi, no business calls. Just the sea, sun, and the woman who had become his everything. They explored lemon groves in Positano, danced barefoot on the villa terrace at midnight, and made love with the windows open, the sea breeze rolling across the silk sheets. One afternoon, nestled in a hammock with her head on his chest, Janet whispered, "Do you remember Tokyo?" "I remember every second," Nelson replied. "It's the moment I realized I couldn't breathe without you." She kissed his shoulder and whispered, "Then don't stop breathing, because I'm not going anywhere." 1 year later, the hospital room was quiet, dimmed lights, steady beeps from machines, and the soft rhythm of rain outside. Nelson sat beside Janet's bed, eyes wide with awe as she held their newborn son in her arms. He was perfect, brown-skinned, soft curls already forming on his tiny head, his nose small and round, lips pursed in a sleepy pout. "Say hello to your daddy," Janet whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Nelson leaned down, tears in his eyes as he pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead. "I didn't think I could love anyone more than I love you," he said softly. Then he arrived. Janet smiled, exhausted but glowing. "He has your eyes, but I hope he gets my patience." Nelson laughed. "And your laugh, and your heart." They named him Miles Elijah Smith, a name that felt powerful and gentle at once. Later, as the baby slept curled on Nelson's chest, Janet looked at them both, heart full. This was the life she had never dared to imagine, but had always quietly prayed for. Not as an assistant, not behind anyone, but beside the man who finally, fully, truly saw her. And as the rain turned to sun outside their hospital window, Janet knew their story had started with silence, but it would end in joy, together, always. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you. Let's keep growing together. With love from Whispers of Hope.